So today we're talking about something that a lot of people tend to have questions about, and that is sensitivity. There's obviously all kinds of different nuances when it comes to sensitivity, what field of view you are on, if you're on a high FOV or a low FOV, when it comes to your actual settings, what your dead zone should be, your overall horizontal, vertical, your high zoom, your low zoom, your response curve, which is actually a pretty big factor on how you're going to be able to adjust based off these sensitivities. And then also there's the standard aim assist as well as scale aim assist with FOV. If you are on PC, you get the option to turn this off or on. We're going to explain a lot of these differences so you can have a better idea on how you want to set up your aim assist. And I was able to do all kinds of testing. So even if you're on console, I can give you an idea of, hey, you know what? I like this sensitivity when 6.6, but I want to be able to move a little bit faster. What do I need to put my low zoom down to so it still feels the same as it was before? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Enjoy the video, learn something new. Please do me a favor, hit the like button if you're brand new, want to find your way back. Double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. So the first place we'll start is the aim response curve. And if you have this on standard, pretty much what this means is as you go ahead and increase this from the center and you push out a little bit, you're going to get a certain, speed. And then as you go a little bit further, you get more and more speed and it ramps up. So you kind of have that graph that kind of ramps up. When it comes to linear, regardless of how much I press, it's going to be a steady increase over time. So as I get the input, it's going to go in that direction. The more I push, it goes directly, linearly based off the amount of time, amount of pressure I'm applying. So for some people prefer that. Then it comes to dynamic. What dynamic does is as I apply pressure in the beginning, it's a slow, like it doesn't have as high ascent. So for example, even if I'm on a 6, this lower area, I might be really on a 4. And as I go out here, it'll gradually get to what a 6 feels like. And this really comes down to preference. I've been using dynamic for quite a while now, and it just comes down to more of a preference. A lot of top players are using dynamic. It gives them that freedom to go up by higher sense and not be punished on the lower, like micro adjustments that they need to make, especially when they're only moving the thumbstick very slightly versus being able to have that nice control where you kind of get used to it. So personal preference, but dynamic is what I've been using. Then it comes to aim assist, standard, precision, or focusing. There's two different types of aim assist. You got aim assist slowdown, where when you drag your crosshairs across a target, which is this one here, where it slows down pretty heavily. And then you have rotational aim assist, which is when I strafe, it automatically will rotate and grab the player. There's two elements to this, so I can aim down sight and strafe, and I'll get what's more of called a sticky aim. So pretty much what happens is if you go ahead and swap this option from standard to precision or focusing, you lose all the rotational aim assist. There's none. None here. You don't get any rotational aim assist. And then when you actually go across here, it's more sticky. So it kind of converts that strafe mechanic of the rotational, completely gets rid of it. And it just gives you stickier aim assist, way stickier. So like generally bad players that when they get into a gunfight, they don't strafe at all. Precision and focusing is going to be better for you because it kind of has a lock-on feature. Most good players, they know that COD has always had this for a while. So what they'll do is they'll strafe in fights because it helps. And then they get the additional rotation plus the slowdown. So now it's like super sticky, and a good player is going to be able to maximize that. But usually lower skilled players that are newer to the game, they don't usually strafe, so they don't maximize that. So that really comes down to preference. I think in the long run, standard is overall better because you do get a little bit of rotation, even if it's not as sticky on the slowdown. But it also depends on your play style, your skill. The problem usually comes up close. If you're hip firing, you're not going to have any aim assist with the other two, versus with this one, you will have aim assist, slowdown, and the rotation. So it'll be much easier to track your target because there's an AI element to that. So that's kind of how that part works. Again, preference, but I think standard and dynamic are probably generally the way to go. Now let's go ahead and talk about the scale aim assist with FOV. And this is where a lot of people have confusion. So what we do is if we strafe across, what we're going to do is see when this actual changes my direction. You can see right at here, it changes what angle I'm rotating at. But if I go ahead and strafe slowly, you can see when my character model switches like angle there, and it pivots slightly. You can see right around here. And then if we actually go to swap this disabled, we can see that this bubble is going to be a little bit bigger. And see how the bubble starts at like right here instead of right here. So the bubble's much larger and the rotation begins much sooner. And this has pros and cons to it. So for example, if I'm tracking a target, the aim assist will kick in much sooner. So there's an AI element to my movement. It'll be easier to like track on. But since the bubble is so loose, it's nowhere near as sticky as like my aim can feel like it's in mud if I'm this close because the bubble now is so big. But most good players can manage that and then they get full control and it makes it super easy to line up the target. Even though it's not helping nearly as much, you can see how easy it is for me to track this target right in the middle of the center of their body because the aim feels so slow. It's like dropping you down to a 2 sensitivity when you're inside this bubble. And you can notice this even more from right here. You can see this is a normal up and down. As I get closer, you can see how slow. I'm not even on the target. So when it comes to tracking the player, you can see above their head, I get slow down. And if a target is moving, sometimes if your aim assist isn't fast enough, you're going to trail behind them. And it's going to be very hard for you to catch up and to get those shots because the bubble's so large. So in some cases, it can really hurt you. But normally, good players can play on like an 8, 9, 10 sensitivity so that even if a player's moving fast, they'll be able to break through the speed of that because their slow down sensitivity, instead of it being like a 4 or 2 where it can't catch up, it's closer to a 6 because they play on a 10 when they're in slowdown mode. So you can kind of see how my sensitivity, how slow it is when I'm in the bubble. And that's really what we're looking at here. You can see how big that bubble is. If I line up right here, strafe across, you can see where it kicks in. It's this far. There's an imaginary bubble that's kind of helping me to stay on that target or keep me off that target. And this we can experience at range as well. So we can kind of see when this kicks in. The bubble's already kicking in. You can see it's already rotating, but I'm not on the target. So that's like not a good rotation here. Like you see the rotation, it's stopping like over here to rotate, even though the character model's over here. So that is a bad thing. But if I'm good, I can stay on target. And we do the same thing with it enabled. And this is only like, what, that 15 meters or whatever. So if we go ahead and continue across here, we'll see when it kicks in. See how it kicked in a little bit closer? So my adjustment isn't that far off target. So it really depends on your skill level, but you can see how that bubble kicks in much later. So now I can be on target and I'll be right on where I need to be. Versus with it disabled, you can see where it kicks in much, much later. So, or much earlier. So this bubble's huge. And there it is. It's already kicking in. So when I adjust, I have to adjust more, which for some, that could be tricky. So obviously, if I'm coming over here, I'll aim and I'll be able to get locked on regardless because aim assist does a lot of the work for you. But that's just kind of how that works. Now let's talk a little bit about comparing sensitivities in the game. So to do a lot of this testing, pretty much what I used is the compass at the top. I put my measurement exactly at 0, and then I just held to the right and held, do a couple rotations, time that, and then you get a kind of idea of how many rotations per second that it's doing or degrees per second that gives you the rotation speed. And once you're able to do that, you can figure out, okay, when your sensitivity is this at this FOV or this sensitivity at whatever times this multiplier, able to figure out a bunch of interesting things to give you a better idea if you're making the transition from console to PC or you're just increasing your FOV in general, kind of how the impact is going to have on your overall sensitivity so you can still maintain your accuracy. On top of that, we did that with low zooms of various ones so we get a better idea on how that particular mechanic works with your individual sensitivity, because as you change your FOV, there's 2 different components. Like the 120 number is just the width. There's also a height. So your vertical changes at a different rate. I didn't spend too much time testing vertical. It was mainly the horizontal, since normally most people keep those 1-to-1, meaning that if you're at a 7 sensitivity, it's usually 7.7, or even if it's 7.8, you adjust those based off preference. We usually try to find out the sensitivity from left to right. So that's what we're going to take a look at here, because it seems like there's a lot of debate, especially among top level players, whether or not they should have scale aim assist on or off. And we're going to kind of take a look at that. So this is a result of that testing. There's a lot of numbers going on here, but I was able to figure out something that I didn't already know about sensitivities and how it works with aim down sight. If you use a 1x multiplier at 80 FOV, or whether or not it's at 120 FOV, what ends up happening is when you aim down sight, your actual sensitivity while aim down sight is about 75% slower. So it's only about, it only works at about 22% that original speed. And that's from testing the stuff like I just showed you, where you do the rotations, you time it, and you get a speed of those rotations. You can see the difference between like 135 at 1 sensitivity. That's the speed at which you rotate, compared to 28. So it's dead slow when you're aimed down sight. And the same thing carries over when you're about 800 speed at 20 cents, compared to roughly 200 speed. So it's like a quarter of that speed. And then when you actually lower the ADS multiplier, it lowers the actual ADS speed. You end up with a rotation speed of 800 degrees per second. The regular 1x multiplier gives you 200 speed, so 25% of that. And then when you actually go ahead and put on the 0.85 multiplier, it ends up lowering that 200 down to about 170, which is about 85%. So it actually tracks, and those things work pretty well. And then the same thing carries over for the most part when it comes to the 120 FOV. But one thing I was able to see in addition to that is to prove something I've said before, is that generally, if you're going to go ahead and raise your FOV, you should be lowering your sensitivity to keep your same level of consistency. And this was being able to be shown here too. So if you play on a 1010 on console, you're at 80 FOV, you're roughly playing at a speed of 407 in the hip fire and 101 in the aim down sight. Numbers aren't all that important, but it does allow us to compare them head to head when we're playing at 120 FOV. That same 10 sensitivity is in reality like a 3 sensitivity at 120. So there is a drastic difference on how much control you have over it. Obviously, this gets compounded with aim down sight slowdown that you get in the rotational aim assist. But this is kind of an interesting thing. So if somebody was actually trying to keep their sensitivity 1-to-1 from hip fire to aim down sight, they'd have to multiply it by 4. So your aim down sight multiplier would have to be 4x if you wanted them to actually match, and they would appear 1-to-1, with the exception of when you have aim down sight slowdown. So I wonder if this actually matters when it comes to keyboard and mouse players. If you want to go ahead and maintain that accuracy, you could maybe put that. I didn't test that, but maybe something at least to consider, try out, experiment with. But overall, what we can see here is the aim down sight is like a 3 sensitivity when you were on a 10 on console. So if you're factoring over and it feels like, man, I don't have any aim assist, think in your mind, if you're in reality, if you were playing on a 10 sensitivity on console, you just carried it over and you're on 10 sensitivity at 120 FOV, you're talking about having almost double the sensitivity, almost playing like on an 1818. If you look at the 20 sensitivity slowdown is 200, and a 1010 at 120 is close to 180. You're playing on a 20 cents if you're on 120. So it drastically changes, and you can account for that by lowering the ADS sensitivity. That's why some people that play on like a 20 cents, to kind of be flashy with the movement and make it look good, their aim down sight sensitivity is like a 0.5 to get it much lower and in line with something that's a little bit more manageable. So I thought that's something I would point out. If you're looking to kind of modify it or understand how that works, you can definitely do the math for it. Whatever the speed is at 6 sensitivity, if you wanted to maintain that aim down sight sensitivity, but boost up your base sensitivity, you could boost it up to a 10 from a 6 if you're on console. You would just have to lower that to a 0.75. So it's just kind of a little bit weird numbers there, but that's kind of how it works. Now on to some recommendations. When it comes to field of view, I personally play at 110. I know there's a lot of good players that play at 110. There's some that play at 105. And there's some that even play on 80, like, because they're playing on a console. There's some really good players out there. And then a lot of people like the 120 just because it makes them get like they're feeling like the movement's all there. But you can sacrifice a little bit of accuracy at 120, even though it will make it look like you have less recoil with the affected FOV. The targets are much smaller, so it means you have to be able to hit a smaller target. Also, with the way the aim assist works, the bubble could be a little bit looser. So if you're playing on a higher sense, it could impact you in a different way. So personally, I think the field of view at 110 is solid, but that is a very much preference thing. When it comes to controller stuff, I would say that you could play with whatever sensitivity you want. Ideally, keep in mind that if you are swapping over to a higher FOV, you would want to lower this. So in reality, a 6.6 is like a 10.10 on console, or whatever the numbers that I just talked about. But this ADS zoom, you can actually lower this so you still feel like you have really good aim, because the FOV when you're zoomed out on 120 is a little bit different when you have it on affected. So you could always play with this number. The response curve, I think the dynamic allows for a little bit more macro adjustments. Some people just prefer linear. It really comes down to preference. I don't think one of these is, oh my God, it's better than ever. But what ends up happening is one good player, that's all it takes sometimes, and everyone just copies them. What is so-and-so using? And then they just copy them. They like it, and they're like, cool, that's what I use now. And then everyone copies that person, and they copy them. And it's just kind of one of those things. At whatever point, dynamic was chosen by top players as, hey, use this. And then now everyone uses that. And I think that's kind of where it goes. Even though the difference between them is very negligible, you probably wouldn't notice for the most part. When it comes to the aim assist, standard, I think is generally the way to go. It allows you to get the benefits of both worlds with the rotational and the slowdown, even though precision and focusing are much stickier in terms of actually locking on to the target when you're crossing over on the crosshairs with the aim down sight slowdown. And then scale aim assist with FOV. I think this really depends on your skill level. I think most good players, if you're using reg guns, SMG, rifle, the disabled is probably generally better just because it kicks in sooner and it kind of aids you, especially if your sensitivity is fast enough to break it. If, like, let's say you're trailing a target, you can actually catch up and use it and have good control over the weapon. I think if your sensitivity is a little bit too low, enabled might be the way to go. Or if you're sniping, what ends up happening is if you do disabled, the bubble might be pretty big. So if you actually zoom in on a target, you're not going to feel like you get any aim assist because of how big that bubble is. The entire bubble fits within the optic. So you're going to feel like, man, it's not helping me. What's going on? So I think when it comes to sniping, enabled might be just generally the better way to go. But in general, up close, like where a lot of engagements are going to happen, disabled is probably generally better. But again, preference, that's kind of what I lean towards. Based off the data and the way it would work and the way it feels, I think disabled is definitely okay. But again, the difference is so small and it's going to be very niche scenarios. Try it, see if you like it, whichever you prefer, go with that. But it kind of gives you a better idea of what to look for when you're using it. Hopefully, guys, enjoyed the video, learned something new. If you did, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.